Hello and welcome to another episode of Statford Bridge Chelsea by the Numbers. We're going to talk about projections. We're going to talk about the season. We're going to talk about where I expect Chelsea to be. We're going to talk about where I expect a number of other teams to be. And that's what we're going to talk about. I posted this on Twitter, so if you've seen before I recorded this, so if you've seen it, you will have seen me talking about the final points total and answering questions on Twitter and Blue Sky about it. But I wanted to talk about how we got there. And people are not going to like some things, and some things they're going to like. From the start, we start with two different bookies' points totals. Now, you could very fairly say, Kieran, that is cheating. You're just starting with the betting markets. That's a very fair point. I've done this in the past with last year's points totals. I've done this with last year's X points, a whole bunch of things. And some of it works, some of it doesn't. But if you start from the initial betting models, I think one of the things that you capture, because you'll see behind this black square, is we have a whole bunch of things that are kind of already captured by, in theory, by the betting models, that it's a very good capture of direction of movement for a lot of these teams, where if a team is improving, that will be captured. And then we're going to talk about some things that should be captured by the season points totals, or may be captured by the season points totals. And you kind of almost double count them, and it will give you a pretty good directionality on points, I think. But we start with their betting market points totals. Very simple. I take the average across two places. It is what it is. It's very fine. Now, one of the things that we really want to capture is we want to capture what is happening to the teams, right? Because all of these teams do some amount of transfers season to season, and those transfers, who they bring in, who they lose, is going to be very indicative of the shape their team is in for this season, right? As much as we talk about coaching and tactics and vibes and Uncle Tosin in the dressing room, the thing that really matters is how good the players on the pitch are. And one of the ways we can capture that, I've talked about this a lot, is using models like Davies. Davies is an approximator of a model called G+, which is just a possession value model. The idea is that you can look effectively at all the different things these players are doing in terms of moving the ball into the box and winning the ball back and passing the ball forward and dribbling past people and shooting and blah, 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 blah. And you can see how good is this player. Now, what we can do is I can look at every single team and say, who did they sign? Who did they move out? How much are those players going to play? How much value did they bring to their team in a role last season? How does their role and their production from the last team move over to their new team, and basically project that out to a net Davies value? So whatever, we could call it net possession value, whatever you want to call it. But functionally, if I look at Arsenal, take someone like Victor Gyökeres. Gyökeres was something like 10 goals better than the average Portuguese league striker. So we start with 10. Then we say, okay, what is the conversion factor for the Portuguese league to the Premier League? These are very rough. I have not regressed these particularly well. The error bars on them are very big. I use something like 60% for the Portuguese league. So his 10 goals better than the average striker is now 6 goals better than the average striker. And then we say, okay, Gyökeres played lots and lots and lots for Sporting, and he did lots and lots and lots for them. How does that translate to Arsenal? He's probably going to play somewhat less because Arsenal have more better players. Let's say he's going to play 80% of the minutes. And so all of a sudden, his 6 goals of additional value is 5 goals of additional value over an average striker. In some instances, his less than others. You have to think, what is the value of the player they are replacing, and where are they going to go in terms of minutes played and in terms of role. For example, Manchester United signed Benjamin Sesko. Benjamin Sesko was worth something like 3 goals over the average striker in the Bundesliga. He is replacing Rasmus Højlund, who is now going to leave the club. So we also have to subtract Rasmus Højlund's value out. And you can go through and you can do this for a number of players. Like for Chelsea, Chelsea have an interesting thing to deal with where Andre Santos, for example, comes in, very positively valued player, very helpful, but his minutes are going to come at the expense of a substitute defensive midfielder who did not exist last year. Moises Caicedo played every single game. So his minutes are coming at the expense of the aggregate of Enzo and Caicedo and a little bit of Dewsbury Hall, who played in midfield in those minutes, right? So now you have, okay, yes, Andre Santos is great. Yes, he's better than Dewsbury Hall. Dewsbury Hall played 290 Premier League minutes for Chelsea last year. Andre Santos is going to presumably play many more than 290 Premier League minutes. So you are actually pulling out from Caicedo in some of that value. And so you can go through and you can look at all of them. And you have the net goals added in and the net goals added out. So those like players sold, but also players replaced due to minutes pop up on the other side. And you see some interesting things. One, Arsenal added a lot of value. They lost basically nothing. The main player they lost was Thomas Partey, who was like not that great, but they also will not play some players who had negative value last year, who were below average in terms of their goals added numbers. Liverpool, a very big 16 between Ekitike and Florian Wirtz. Wirtz does not actually pop that much on Davies for last season, but it's there. But they also moved out very good players in Trent and Luis Diaz. So like not all there. City added a bunch, did not lose a ton of value. Chelsea added a bunch, lost some value. Some of these teams obviously have some pending business going into the remainder of the transfer deadline. For Liverpool specifically, I did not add Isak. I think that deal will not get done. But for Chelsea, I did add Garnacho and Simons, and I did move out Madueke and Jackson. We'll see if that happens. It is what it is. And you can go through, and there's some other interesting themes. United show up pretty interestingly. Bournemouth show up as adding a lot of value in, but they lose a lot in Huijsen and Sabarni. This was before they lost Dango Ouattara, who I suspect will also be useful, and I'll update these later. We shall see. And you get a sense for the net amount of goals they have added to their team. And what we can do is that we can take how many goals how many points is a goal worth? And the answer to that question is something like 0.6. It's about 0.6. There's some error bars on it. But a goal difference is about 0.6 points. And you end up with, okay, how many points did they add? How many points did they lose? And you're going to look at this and you're going to say, well, Kieran, everybody got better in terms of points. And that's valid. That's a valid criticism. One of the things that you see with this is like, because the Premier League can afford to add talent more than other leagues, the influx will almost always be positive of net goals. And yet when we think about this in terms of points, like an additional 3 points for Arsenal has to come with 0 points for someone else. So like this is probably the weakest part of the methodology, but it is what it is. And we see Arsenal had a bunch of points, City had a bunch of points, Chelsea had some points, Liverpool had some points, United, and then we see Leeds add some points that liked their deals quite a bit, and you see some teams losing, West Ham's, your Burnleys. Really didn't like the Burnley business. And so that's the transfer side of things, right? That's, here we are, this is the team, what are they going to look like next year? The more interesting thing is to look at what are the controllables for that just like derail the season or have nothing to do with team strength, have nothing to do with the ability of the team, are purely luck-based variables. And there's a few things in there. The first one to talk about is age. So, do we suspect that the team will improve due to their age profile, decline due to their age profile, or be the same? Effectively, here I took all the squads. I did a weighted average of their squad age by minutes played, and basically Z scored everybody. So how far away from the middle are you? Chelsea get a +2 because they were comfortably the youngest team in the league. Liverpool get a -2 because they were the oldest team in the league, or one of the oldest teams in the league. Someone like Everton should get a +2 or a -2, but they sold or let walk all of their old players and replaced them with young or peak age players. So this is an estimate of what their age will look like for this season rather than what it was last season, if that makes sense. But same with like Bournemouth. Bournemouth, the whole thing that why Bournemouth were going to get better is because they had two very good, very young center backs who are now not there. But you should expect to see some age improvement or decline across the thing. The reality is the Premier League is quite smart about not buying old, crappy players anymore. So this is a not huge factor anymore. The second column here is luck. The luck column is effectively the goal difference and then the points added of the things you cannot control. So things like red cards and things like penalties and things like own goals. So effectively, what I did here is I took every team and I moved their penalty difference to 0. And then calculated the point change from that goal difference change. I took their red card difference and moved it to 0 and took what the average point goal difference worth of a red card is. A red card, for example, is worth about 3/4 of an expected goal for a half. So you can do it by the minutes played. And if you put everyone to 0 minutes played up or against red cards, or with a red card or against the red card, and you move everyone back to normal. And then also penalties. Penalty difference, red card difference, and own goals. Sorry, you move everyone to 0 own goal difference. And you can see a couple things. Arsenal get a +2. One of the things you will hear Arsenal fans lie about, not lie because it's real, but complain about online all the time, is we had so many red cards and like that totally skewed our metrics. And that's actually very real. They had a bunch of red cards at the beginning of the season, and if you look at them without the red cards for the first like half of the year, they were basically just as good as Liverpool. Chelsea is a team who benefited from here. Brentford are a team who lose here. I cannot recall which of the factors was the most impactful here, probably penalties. But the most interesting one was Wolves, Wolves have been dead in the water on people's math because they have not been a good team. But Wolves conceded 9 penalties last year and won 0. And that is just remarkably improbable. Like, that's just simply not going to happen again. And there is disagreement about how skillful winning penalties is. And, like, there are some players who there is signal that they win penalties more than others. Marcus Rashford, Lionel Messi, Jamie Vardy, Kylian Mbappe, like there's guys there. Raheem Sterling has won a lot of penalties. There's signal there. However, for the vast majority of players, the signal is much smaller than the noise. And the last factor is health. So what you could do if you wanted to do this really, really well is you could look at exactly the players who missed the time they missed, how many games they missed, what their contribution would have been in the games they missed, and calculated, okay, this is how much goal difference every team lost due to their injuries. I did not do that. That's a lot of effort. I sorted the injury table by games and moved everyone to the middle and gave you 0, 1, 2, -1, or -2, depending on how far away from the average you were, because it seems unlikely to me. Like, the thing is with the injuries is the injury magnitudes are totally random chance. Not totally random chance, but there's like a big portion of random chance, and their magnitudes are huge. Like, I cannot predict that Liverpool, who get a -1 because Liverpool were quite healthy with an old team, are not going to run the exact same again. But I also can't tell you because they're old, they're going to get hurt. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? So we averaged everyone out kind of to a middling injury record. Chelsea are a team here who lose one because Chelsea were actually very healthy last year, which is a funny thing to say about a team that like Reece James didn't play that much, Wesley Fofana didn't play that much, Nicholas Jackson missed a few months in the middle. But like, aside from those three guys, who are all admittedly very important guys, Chelsea were exceedingly healthy. Nobody else got injured. And even then, Jackson was like not that long in injury. And James, like by the end, was playing pretty consistently. Fofana was cooked. But broadly, Chelsea had very little risk in terms of injury. They did not have guys missing significant amounts of time. And so that's another part of it. And then we can look at we can add all those numbers up, right? And we can say, okay, now what's the X points total based on the betting numbers and then the transfers and then the kind of like random chance things, and where do we get? And then the last thing we can do is look at last season and say there's still signal in how good these teams were last season. And we can take a weighted average of where we project them to be versus where they finished last year. And we end up with a points total of what they got. And so if we go through all the teams and we look at if we look at the projections for all of these teams, we end up with a very nice table that unfortunately has Arsenal in first. But it's starting, I think this is not a super non-consensus opinion, but it does have Chelsea separating themselves from the chasing pack quite a bit. Now, when I posted this, I got a lot of pushback about, well, Chelsea are only 4 points better than last year. Like, that would be the worst case scenario. I think that's like very not true. Because I think if you look at what actually is the worst case scenario for someone like Chelsea, your best center back is out for the season. Maybe he comes back in April. Maybe he comes back in May. I would personally bet against him coming back and playing a single game in the 2025-2026 season for Chelsea. I would bet that his return to play is the World Cup. But like, if Chelsea don't get any consistent center back play, that's a huge problem for your team. Similarly, you moved on Madueke. You are intending to move on Jackson. That's a lot of goals from last year and a lot of final third good stuff from last year. Now, you may say, Kieran, we got João Pedro and Delap, and that is very, very true. But again, both of those guys could be the same player they were last year. Chelsea have made a very big bet that both of them will scale up to playing at Chelsea really well. And they might not. They might, but they might not. One of them might and one of them might not. Both of them might, both of them might not. And so you have like pretty big downside air, and then you have like, how much is Esteval going to play? What, Bob Sanchez had a pretty good season by his career standards last year. What is he going to be next year? Cole Palmer declined in the second half of the season, was very good in the first half of the season. He did not have a break at all this summer. What is he going to look like? Chelsea did not have a break at all this summer. How are they going to play in the second half of the season? All of those things. They had very good health, all those things. That when you put together, there is a real downside case for Chelsea. That's probably something like 58 points. Do I think that's likely? No, I don't think that's likely. I think that's like a first percentile outcome or a fifth percentile outcome. Like, it's really bad. On the flip side, I say Chelsea have like 15 points of downside. Do I think Chelsea have 15 points of upside to win the league? Not quite. But if I was to make the upside case to you, I would say they hold on to Jackson, and between Jackson, Delap, and João Pedro, those two guys both scale up, which means that João Pedro or Jackson is free to do. They're not only playing striker, maybe sometimes one of them is playing as a winger, maybe João Pedro's playing as a 10. You're rotating them really well between the Cups and the Champions League and whatever, and they're all scoring. Cole Palmer plays like the first half of the season for the whole year. Esteval who was a really fun translation case for the Davies thing, because like you look at Esteval and he's like +8 to the Brazilian league, but then you have to translation factor the Brazilian league, which like that I put 50%, but your guess is as good as mine. I think 50% is probably kind. And then it's like, well, how much is he going to play? And that's a real interest. Like if you go back and look at the Esteval pod, I said he's going to play 15 games and score 5 goals or assists, and like that number is way up now. Like that's a very bad projection, I think, based on the Club World Cup. All the center backs play well. Wesley Fofana is healthy. Reece James is healthier. Sanchez plays very well again. All the wingers hit and do the things you want them to do. Xavi Simons and Garnacho happen, and they're very good. Like, can you get to 85 points? Like, yeah. Do I think that's a 95th percentile outcome and quite unlikely? Also, yes. And so you end up somewhere in the low 70s, high 60s as a pretty middle of the road outcome for Chelsea. And comfortably ahead of Villa and Newcastle. What's going to happen with Isak for Newcastle? That's a big bumper for them. I think the model is probably too high on United. I would definitely take the under on 62 points if I was making a betting market. I think it's probably a bit aggressive on Brighton, but I think there's a lot to like there. I see the appeal with Spurs. Bournemouth, I think, will be interesting. I think Everton, it's probably a little bit lower on than it should be. Palace, I think it's lower on than it should be. And then you get to the bottom of the table and just the relegated teams stink and Leeds maybe have a chance. But that's kind of the model as a whole. I think when you think about Chelsea for the season, I'm very excited to watch. And I saw The Athletic put a thing out about Chelsea are the most optimistic team in the league this year. 98% of fans are optimistic for this year. 2% are pessimistic. Last year, Chelsea were one of the bottom teams in that metric. I think that it's never good when Chelsea fans are optimistic because we're a bit deluded. But I think like the vibes are good. I get it. I think the vibes are good. I get it. But I would definitely hold my horses on people talking about title challenges. Rounding up Chelsea news, we had rumors of a Disasi, Detra Fofana double move to Wolves, which I would actually quite like for Wolves. I think both those guys are good players, certainly better than the players they have. Fofana as like a backup 9 to Strand Larsen, or can play as like a very attacking winger. I think it would be very interesting for them. Neither Simons or Garnacho is done yet. Fabrizio Romano keeps telling us how far along Garnacho is, and in secret it's advanced. Simons is not happening. We'll see what happens with Nkunku. It appears that no deals in will happen until Nkunku is moved. We have not heard anything about Raheem Sterling, other than like some brief Fulham links. We have not heard anything about Ben Chilwell. We have not heard anything about Alfie Gilchrist. We have not heard anything about Carney Chukwuemeka, aside from like he wants to go to Dortmund, and who knows what's going to happen with Dortmund. Renato Vega appears to be stuck now that his Atletico Madrid move is done. And this is where we are. So we will see. There's a lot of outgoings. I don't suspect there will there will be many incomings, but that's it. Anyways, that is all for me. As always, enjoy the soccer.